I think no matter who you are, the first year teaching is challenging. Starting my fifth year now doing it full time, and I'm still every day learning new ways to express myself in the classroom and new ways to connect with students and refining my approach every semester. And I think you have to have that passion though for connecting with the students. Uh, that I think that's kind of what's unfortunate sometimes is that people who really want to be researchers are almost like forced into the classroom a little bit. Maybe they didn't get a big enough grant, so they didn't get enough ability to teach less classes because the college says, okay, you're not getting enough grant money, so you're going to have to teach more classes. That happens pretty regularly. So I think it's better when you're coming from it from the perspective in the beginning, I want to teach, rather than the perspective of, well, I want to do research and teach. So maybe that's an argument for why it's good to go to a teaching college as an undergraduate rather than go to a research institution. But there's pros and cons both sides because you also are then exposing yourself to the most cutting edge people in the field when you go to a research institution. So there's pros and cons. But I certainly was coming at it from a very different perspective, probably than most people who work in four-year institutions as assistant professors of computer science.
I love the way that you explained, like, over the last 5 years of teaching, you've just been refining your process and learning how to be a better teacher, learning how to better express yourself and to teach certain concepts. What were some things that you've learned along the way to give advice for those who are just starting to teach computer science? Some things that you maybe didn't do in the beginning, but now you do it because you've learned that that was actually a great way of presenting concepts or connecting better with your students.
Well, I'd say the number one thing is to be interactive. When I was in college, and I had a very good experience in undergrad, but still a lot of teaching was this: the professor gets up in the front of the room, does a lecture, you take notes, and that's kind of the end, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's not, and that wasn't that long ago, right? I'm only
Right,
11
right,
years out of
totally.
undergrad, but that's still how it really was. But students today don't really want that. They want a two-way conversation. They want interactive segments. So instead of me going up and showing, okay, here's this code I wrote, I do that sometimes still, of course, but then it's also, there has to be an aspect where here's the code that they wrote, and here's me helping you step by step, sometimes even in class, going around the classroom from student to student, helping them as we're approaching the problem together as a class, putting them into small groups where they work together, and then demonstrating that to the rest of the class, and me kind of guiding and
Mm.
showing where they did things great and where things could be a little bit better. So having a two-way conversation, having discussions, even in computer science classes, there's plenty of room to have discussions about different avenues of technical solutions, about ethics, about different stylistic choices. There's all kinds of places that if you really think about it, you can have a discussion that people might not have that maybe sometimes used to be more dry in the classroom. I think people today are finding ways to make more substantial and interactive. So that's my number one piece of advice is, and I think what I've learned over the last 5 years is that it's very important to have an interactive classroom, a hands-on classroom. People use buzzwords like active learning, but I think there's really some substance to that.
And how do you draw out? Because sometimes your students might be very shy, and you might have a class, like one year, you might have a class order where everyone's like very active, enjoys the discussion, and the next quarter, maybe half the class is just more shy, more reserved. How are you kind of drawing out maybe the quiet ones in the class?
Well, that's something I still struggle with. You have to be careful not to push too hard, also, because when you push too hard, and I've made that mistake before, some students actually get offended that you're trying to like, they feel like you're putting them on the spot, right? And so
Mm.
you have to be careful that there's a balance to be struck there where, look, if this person is doing great work and they basically know what they're doing, that you don't force them into situations that make demotivate them because they feel like they're being singled out just because they're not as talkative as the other students. But one thing I've tried to do in one of my classes, I teach a class on open source software development. I just handed it off actually to somebody else this last year, but I taught it for 3 years, and I'd put the students actually in a circle like in an English lit
Oh,
class. And I know you have an English
really?
background, right? I read
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yes.
So right. So I took those classes too as a minor, and you'd basically talk about the book you read in a circle, and dive into some of the different lenses that you could see the literature through. So in the open source class, we did that to talk about ethics, history,
Oh,
development techniques in software. There are places for that. I mean, there are ways to take
hmm.
what you might expect in a liberal arts classroom and put that into a technical classroom if you find the right subject matter for it. Now, it doesn't work for everything. When you're teaching, about data structures and algorithms, that doesn't as much lend itself into a circle. But even in that class last year, we had a day talking about some of the ethics of modern algorithms, where we did actually sit in a circle and talk.
Mm.
So there's ways to have a discussion if you really are seeking it.
Thank you so much for listening to this clip of the Data Talk podcast. To check out the full show or see the full catalog of previous episodes, go to Experian.com/Data Talk.